Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today, and thanks very much, Dot. As Dot has mentioned, my name is Alice and I'm a development editor in our editorial team. I'm really delighted to introduce to you our upcoming title, Amnesty International Archives, a Global Human Rights Movement, which I'm incredibly excited about seeing published later this year after many years working behind the scenes bringing this together. This resource will explore the history of leading human rights organisation and NGO, Amnesty International, by providing access to the historical archives of Amnesty's International Secretariat, which have been sourced from the International Institute of Social History in Amsterdam. Documents within this resource begin in 1961 with the founding of Amnesty and continue for 30 years. It will provide unparalleled access for researchers to trace the internal developments of the organisation as they grew and as their campaign mandate changed. Amnesty International was founded with the initial aim to work towards obtaining amnesty for prisoners of conscience around the world. Over the years, the organisation's mandate has expanded, aiming for the abolition of the death penalty and torture, for the ending of disappearances and extrajudicial execution. They also began to deal with women's, children's, Indigenous and refugee rights across this period, which they continue today. The various campaigns of Amnesty across this time in fighting for human rights and ending forms of ill treatment are explored in detail throughout the documents that will be featured within this resource. Over the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to provide you with an initial introduction to the various content that you'll be able to find in the archive collection and the particular themes in which these documents speak to. A key portion of this resource will be dedicated to the organisational records of Amnesty, in particular the internal records of the International Secretariat. These include documents such as internal reports, correspondence, conference proceedings, memoranda, meeting minutes and resolutions. As a whole, these documents provide great insight into Amnesty's top-level policy decision-making, exploring the rationale behind these decisions and the changes in approach, as well as the repercussions of certain decisions. These documents also highlight the work carried out by the International Secretariat, who were involved in arranging and undertaking missions and publicity campaigns and conducting research on behalf of prisoners and into various human rights atrocities around the world. We can understand a great deal about Amnesty's global expansion through these records as they began to establish local chapters and national sections. Included are the circulars sent from the Secretariat to these sections as a means to keep them informed of the human rights violations globally and the work that Amnesty was doing to overcome these. As part of the internal records that will feature in this resource are the papers of Eric Baker. Baker was one of the founders of Amnesty, and he acted as Secretary General and Chairman of the British section during his time for the organisation. Baker is perhaps most well known, though, for spearheading the campaign for the abolition of torture in the 1970s, which is one of Amnesty's earliest campaigns and perhaps their most notable. Baker's involvement across the various levels at Amnesty are explored within his papers and provide useful context to some of the official internal records. Public-facing documents will also be included in this resource, and they provide an interesting counterpoint to these internal records. Of particular note is the inclusion of all urgent actions that were produced by Amnesty from their inception in 1973 until the end of 1991. Urgent actions are documents that request rapid action on behalf of a person or persons who are in immediate danger. They set out the situation, provide details related to the case, and recommend a course of action. These documents paint a picture of Amnesty's rapid response to situations as they unfold and provide significant details regarding individuals who are facing human rights violations and the urgently needed help. The urgent actions provide a wealth of information for the study of the rise and fall of political and military regimes, humanitarian crises, and anthropological investigations into human atrocities. Through circulars sent to AI sections, reports and urgent actions produced for prisoners across the globe, users will be able to trace the development of key events, violations and campaigns of the global human rights movement, such as torture and ill treatment in Turkey, capital punishment in the United States, and disappearances in Sri Lanka. Outside of the organisational records, Amnesty International Archives will also feature an impressive 54 hours of oral history recordings. These interviews were conducted with key individuals who were involved in the founding of Amnesty, in which they discussed their own experiences working for the organisation in its earliest years and onwards. Through these interviews, users can gain insight into the practicality of how Amnesty developed in its early years, as well as the education, careers, relationships, and motivations of Amnesty's founders. For example, there are interviews with Diana Redhouse. Diana was a local group member of Amnesty in the early 1960s, and she actually designed the candle-in barbed wire logo that Amnesty that you've seen in various photographs throughout this PowerPoint, and actually is here on the right and has been adapted in this way. There are interviews with Peter Benenson, who was the founder of Amnesty and acted as Secretary General until 1966, and also with Lewis Blom Cooper. During his interview, he discusses his experience of attending the Nelson Mandela trial on behalf of Amnesty. As a result of Amnesty's global reach and their international campaigns, all of the documents I've introduced so far provide a wealth of information on the global social change and key political events of the mid to late 20th century. The Cold War and South American dictatorships are particularly notable, although there's also coverage of the Greek junta dictatorship, violations against Kurdish populations of Syria, Turkey, and Iran, civil wars in El Salvador and Guatemala, the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, the Troubles, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and of course, apartheid. Nelson Mandela was a notable prisoner for Amnesty. As I mentioned just now, Lewis Blom Cooper attended his trial in 1962 on behalf of the organisation. However, after internal debate, it was later decided that Mandela should not be considered a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty due to his stance on advocating for the use of violence in the struggle against apartheid. Global politics and international relations are hugely important topics that feature within this resource and can be read through these documents, particularly due to the accusations that Amnesty made throughout its history on statewide human rights violations. Documents feature significant coverage of this, along with coverage of government responses to these accusations and investigations. Alongside the archival documents, like all other AM resources, we'll also be including a number of additional features that are geared towards helping students and users to contextualize the digitized records. For example, there will be contextualizing essays, video interviews with academics, an image gallery of Amnesty marketing and campaign posters, an interactive chronology that covers the history of Amnesty but also places this within the events of the wider human rights movement. There will also be written introductions to the various document collections that are featured and those that I briefly touched on today. As a means to navigate through the abundance of records, there will also be fully searchable through OCR and HDR and feature detailed document level metadata. So that's it for my whistle-stop tour to Amnesty International Archives of Global Human Rights Movement that publishes later this year. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you're all excited to see it come out.